Hello, everybody, and welcome to 3-Point Perspective, the podcast about illustration, how to do it, how to make a living at it, and how to make an impact in the world with your art. I'm Jake Parker.
I'm Lee White.
And I'm Will Terry. And all three of us are professional illustrators. And we've worked with just about every major publisher in the business. We've published somewhere around 50 or 75 books together. And we've all taught illustration at universities.
Each week we come at you guys with a different topic in illustration. Sometimes we fight, sometimes we agree, but each time you're going to learn something brand new.
All right. Before we get into our questions today, I just wanted to highlight something that one of our SVS teachers brought up on the forum. And I don't know if you guys read this, but he titled it McGraw-Hill Publisher Charging Illustrators a Fee to Get Paid. Did you guys see that?
I did.
Yeah.
I signed a petition against it and posted it to my Facebook page.
Okay. So you want to explain what's going on here?
They have set up an accounting system or whatever, so illustrators and writers can get paid for royalties and advances and stuff like that. But in order to do it, they charge the illustrator a 2% fee to be a part of it, which would be okay if it was an expedited system or some other way. You know, like when you buy something, you can say, okay, give me overnight shipping and you're going to pay extra for that, or just give me the free shipping. It's going to take 5 days. Sort of that would be an okay way to do this if it was just an option to get paid quicker, but it's not. It's mandatory that in order to get paid at all, you have to be willing to suck up this 2%, which it's
a company store. That's what they're going, it's the company store again.
It's terrible. To take 2% so we can pay for their accounting problems is unforgivable to me.
Well, and it shows where they feel they are in the food chain. It's an arrogant move. And the question is, do illustrators collectively have enough power and enough communication online to be able to say no?
Well, I will tell you this: if the petition is still going by the time this thing airs, go to our show notes and we'll put the link there so you can sign. I signed a petition. Like I said, I put it on my Facebook page just to give some kind of pushback against this and let them know that, hey, we're paying attention. You can't just throw that out there without anybody saying anything.
It'd be interesting to know what an attorney would say. Like what would happen if everyone refused to sign it? Would they be forced to discontinue that policy? Or could they just sit on the money and go, well, you guys didn't sign up, so we're just holding on to the money?
Yeah.
I don't know legally.
If you think about it, 2%, for some, it might be a rounding error, but if you did say you did a $5,000 children's book, just to get your money, you'd have to pay over $100 to get that money,
Yeah, and if it was the only fee ever, I wouldn't mind it. But we're also paying. A lot of people have to pay their agent, and then they also have to pay taxes, and we also have to pay for all of our equipment that we're using to make this work. There's so many things that come out of our paycheck already as freelancers that at some point you got to draw the line.
Yeah, I should be clear too. Like, I don't think they're paying anybody $5,000 for a whole children's book, but that's a little low for I think a children's book.
Well, if it was 10,000 to be 200, and if it was 20,000,
right, it just keeps going up. Yeah, it sucks.
Yeah. So
yeah. All right, we've got a few questions to dig into today. Some good ones. You guys ready for this?
Well, let's hear them.
Let's do it. Okay, creating stories after you've already created the characters. I've created a character without a story. Now what? This question comes from Jonathan. So I don't know if you guys have had this problem. I do it all the time. Just create a character. Don't even think about what kind of story they'd be a part of. But he says, I know it's usually more beneficial to create a story first and then the characters within the said story, but often I'll create or update characters without a goal or destination in mind. Sometimes ideas grow and mature over time naturally, but other times I want to make something with those characters right then. So essentially the question is, when does the more short-term approach work, like actively pursuing a project for the characters? And when does the more long-term approach work, like letting ideas germinate over time. And so the question is, I don't think it's. So the question is, should you create a character without a story? If eventually you want to put that character into a story, like, is it just enough to create a Luke Skywalker without thinking about the rebellion and the empire and the force and all that stuff, or do you want to do it as a whole, right? So that's the question. He says, I know it's usually more beneficial to create the story first. Sometimes though, I don't know if that's
disagree.
necessarily it. Yeah,
I mean, it's sort of a chicken and the egg kind of a question, right? In terms of how stories develop. Does the story come first and then the characters are added to it, or vice versa, like he's asking? I think that comes both ways. I don't think it has to be a decided on approach. I don't think there's anything wrong with making a character and then kind of sitting back and saying, okay, what's the world this character lives in, and starting to explore the story just from the character's point of view, how they end up with this, depending on what they have on or what they're holding or what they're doing in your image, how they end up there. And is there any other characters that might go with them as a set? And then, where do they live? Where would they live? And so you start to flesh it out piece by piece and then come up with the story. Or, do you write a whole story and then do the characters? I think I'd rather almost do it organically, like we're talking about here, by writing the character, because then there's no pressure. If it doesn't go anywhere, well, then it's just a standalone character. So, no big deal.
And I think that as the artist, as the author illustrator or artist illustrator, you can, there's no spoon. You can work both ways. You take the artist Steve Tyler from Aerosmith, and when he was writing that song, Janie's Got a Gun. Have you ever heard him talk about that?
No.
He came up with that lyric, just hit his brain. Janie's got a gun. That was the first thing that happened. He's like, Janie's got.
It's like, well, I need.
Yeah,
now I need a song to go.
He wrote the song around that one little phrase. I don't really like that song, but apparently other people did, and so. Yeah, I think you can easily go both ways. And I've done that a bunch of times where you just start drawing and you're just coming up with something that's really interesting, which then informs the story. So
I've started off with the title a lot on a story. I mean, which isn't a great, I would never recommend that for people, but it's happened. I've worked on a number of stories that way.
I think there's three ways into a story, and one is through the characters. One is through like the actual events that are going to take place, or the message that you're, the theme and the message that you're trying to get across. And then the last one is like through the world. So what you can do as a creator is say you create a world, you create an environment, you create, you just world build. And then you can figure out, well, what is the type of story that I want to have take place in this world, and then build characters to go along with it. Or you could do it the other way. You could create this story. I really want to tackle the theme of, good versus evil, and how, it's more important to do what's right, even though it'll cost you, some price to pay to doing good, but it's still important to do good. Like, that's a theme that you could explore with a story, and then find a character that fits that. Or you could just create a character, look at them and think, what kind of situation would I want to put this in? And usually that extends from, like, is this a character who has a certain flaw that needs to be fixed, or they have a certain like power and ability that needs to be tested and challenged? And so that's how I would go about it. If you have a character and you want to put them into a story, give that character a problem that they need to solve. And then your story is, how do they go about solving it? And what kind of things do they come up with to get them out of that hole that you've dug for them, that pit that you've dropped them into? And I think what you'll do is you'll start finding things you didn't know about the character that you should have, that you'll come across as you're writing this story. You'll find things about the story that you didn't know through this character. So that's kind of the approach that I would go about it.
Mm-hmm.
This sort of reminds me of a character that I did rough sketching for the SVS contest, which, by the way, has a new website. Thankful to Jake Parker for that. It's critiquearena.com. But last month's challenge was a traveler, and I was just kind of messing around with it. And then I drew a character ultimately that I think fit the bill for the traveler theme. But as you guys know, if you've been listening to this podcast, that I'm doing a tarot deck, and I like the character so much. I was like, I drew it for the traveler, but I was like, I'm using that for a tarot deck. And so now I'm in this same boat where I can't use it perfectly because it doesn't fit the themes, but now I'm having to adjust. So I've got the character, and now I need to just sort of adjust the narrative on the character to fit the project that I'm doing. And so I think you can bend a character you get the character that you like, and then you just start to bend them for the story. Sort of like what Jake was saying, figure out what kind of story you want to tell. Yeah. For me, it's going to be which card I'm going to do. And then he's going to get all those accessories. So it's kind of a moving target, and you just kind of fill in the blanks as you go.
There's this incredible breakdown of storytelling. I listened to a podcast called Script Notes. Off and on, I listen to it. It's like for screenwriters, people interested in storytelling, screenwriting, stuff like that. And one episode, they did this breakdown of Finding Nemo, a story breakdown, how, essentially the guts of how that story works. And it was so amazing because he says, your main character is Marlin. And what is he? He's an overprotective dad. So what's the problem you give him? You kidnap his son. So now what does he have to do? This guy's nervous. He's afraid of the big wide ocean. He has to go into the big wide ocean to get his son. It's like his worst nightmare. And if you're telling any sort of, substantial story, you want to deal with like something that has a little tooth to it. Like give a character their worst nightmare and have them have to deal it and overcome it. And so they just went through point by point. It's like, well, what's the first thing? The first thing that he is confronted with is they meet these sharks. I don't know if you guys have seen Finding Nemo, but they meet these sharks, and he's freaking out. He's like, sharks. And then he finds out, no, sharks aren't dangerous. They're like fish are food. Fish aren't food. They're friends. So now it's like, wait, so the sea's not dangerous? Then it turns out the sharks are dangerous and they want to eat them. And it's just the whole movie is going back and forth between, is the ocean dangerous, and him getting just comfortable enough to like be able to deal with it, and then showing him like, no, you're not there yet. You have to overcome this one more thing, I
have a huge problem with this, by the way, that what you're saying right now, because if you have seen my storytelling class at SVS, which I have a pretty in-depth storytelling video, I break down Finding Nemo. I'm serious, in this exact way. Like, that's amazing. And I filmed it like 6 years ago. Oh, I'm going to get some cash. I'm going to.
Well, you should listen to it. They might have done a way better job than you. We'll see.
No. I'm the originator of this thing. They copied me. I'm serious. I broke it down point by point exactly like that. Finding Nemo. God.
Well, see? Can you do it with Toy Story 3?
I can. The whole thing with my theory on storytelling is get rid of the details for your step one. Like, what is a story about? Sans the details. And so that's how I broke down Finding Nemo. It's really about a dad looking for his son. It doesn't matter that it's, that what my part two is, what makes that story interesting, which is the environment and all that other stuff. And so you can figure out, do you have an interesting story, or do you just have interesting characters, or do you have both? And that's how you start to get a better story.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
All right, next question. It's from Miranda. It's titled, "This one's for the writers on this site too. Hello from Milwaukee. I've always been interested in telling my own stories." Milwaukee, by the way, I only know it from Laverne and Shirley.
I knew you were going to say that.
For those of you guys who don't know what Laverne and Shirley is, I mean, there's going to be a big demographic there. Because when was that show on?
I just aged myself, I guess.
You're not even really old enough to remember. I don't know how you watched Laverne and Shirley. How old are you?
You're going to make it.
You don't have to say that.
Give
I'll
us
just say that.
any chance, we'll take it.
I mean, this was a show
Give
that
us
was on.
any rule,
Wow.
we'll break it.
This is
Gonna make our dreams come true.
wow.
You're not the only one that can sing, Lee White.
I guess there's one consistent thing happening is that we're singing on this podcast at some point every time.
Every episode.
That was like the 1980s or the early 80s, right?
I want to say early 80s. It was a spin-off of Happy Days.
Happy
wasn't it?
Days. Yeah.
Which
was even
Happy Days
earlier.
was a spin-off of American Graffiti, which was George Lucas's second film.
Well, and it
So
had
everything comes
Lenny
back
and
to George
Squiggy.
Lucas.
It had Lenny and Squiggy.
Squiggy.
Yeah.
Oh, that's true.
I remember I was a little kid and I was fascinated with the intro because I worked in a beer factory and she sticks her glove on one of the beer bottles and it goes through the whole factory with the glove on it.
It probably destroyed the line,
Yeah, completely wrecked
but
all
they
their
didn't
equipment.
film that part. Yeah.
Wait, why are we talking about Milwaukee and Laverne and Shirley?
Okay, back to the question. Hello from Milwaukee.
Wow.
We are like stinking cats. We cannot stay focused at all. Hello from Milwaukee. I've always been interested in telling my own stories. I grouped all these questions together because they were all story related. So this Miranda, she's been interested in telling her own stories, not only through illustration, but through writing too. So she's a writer illustrator. If I have a completed manuscript and some sketches of the kind of imagery that I'm going to do for it, who exactly do I submit it to when I've completed it? So you've got a manuscript, you've got some sketches. The industry term for that would be like the book dummy. If you have a book dummy, which is essentially a sketchy version of your children's book, they call it a book dummy, and it's just a way for the art director or the editor or the agent or somebody to get a vibe and a feel of what this book is. I would also have a finished illustration and like a finished illustration of one of the spreads, of maybe a book cover, maybe the main character as a part of the submission thing. So first check off those boxes. And this is the kind of thing that we dig in deep into in our Children's Book Pro course. If you go to childrensbookpro.com, you can sign up for that. And like we dig in deep and we explain, here's how you do your character designs for children's books. Here's how you make a book dummy. Here's how you put words on a page and figure out which words go on which page and all that stuff. So if this is the kind of thing that it's up your alley, you are going to really appreciate the Children's Book Pro course that we created. So question is, what do you do once you've created that? What do you do, guys?
I would submit to an agent because agents have become the leg arm for the publishing industry as far as sorting and sifting through manuscripts and getting them into the right hands. So editors, the thing is the agents know the editors personally, and they know what they're looking for, and they know what houses are going to publish what. And so when they see your manuscript, they immediately go, well, there's five editors who will be interested in this genre. They might be interested in this book, and they might even want to publish it. So that's the advantage there. And getting your book read by an editor today is really tough, straight from the artist or author illustrator to the editor. The amount of gatekeeping that takes place there it's almost impossible unless you already have a relationship with that editor or with someone that works in that house. If you're a first time author illustrator, you're just not, unless you bump into this person at a party, this editor, or you stalk them in a restaurant, you're just not going to be able to get through to them. But the agents can. And so,
are you saying that though, if you don't have an agent, then, you're sort of out of luck?
The neat thing about talking to agents is you don't have to be signed up with them. They don't have to represent you to talk to them and to submit to them. And they're constantly looking for new talent. They're always looking for that great story. The great work always, rises to the top and catches people's eyes.
That's true.
So that's how I would do it. I would research agents online and try to find the right ones that represent the type of work that you're doing, and then I would submit to them.
I would say that's very true. I think that's a good answer. To add to that, I would make a multi-pronged approach, I guess. Trying to find agents and all that stuff would definitely be one of the avenues to do that. But then also the things like SCBWI conferences and any kind of grouping, of either live. I guess maybe it's taking place on Zoom now too. Those kind of conferences. That's an easy way to at least start to introduce yourself to these agents and publishers and get a relationship going. You're not going to get a deal from one of these things just by going, but I think it's important to just open up, have a couple of different ways to do it. And then lastly, I was going to say, like, the second I would get done with that manuscript and a couple characters and a couple of spreads, start working on your next one, because I think the one that actually hits is 1 out of 10 that you actually wrote. And I've met a lot of people, students, that they write one, and then I'll see them 3 years later, and they're still shopping that one. So don't hold too tightly to one. It's a numbers game, and I think just having multiple stories. And a lot of times, editors and agents will say that. Well, I'm not really a fan of this story, but do you have something else? You do not want to be sitting there going, "No, I have nothing." So
it's true. Yeah.
And then if you were to go to one of those SCBWI conferences and you did. They charge a little bit to meet with an editor, and there's usually a limited number of spaces. Maybe they'll sell 10 slots for an editor to meet individually with the author, illustrator, or just an author. And they will ask you, it's basically a pitch session. And so they'll say, "What do you got?" And so you're saying, "Well, I got a story about this." I'm like, "Okay, what else you got?" And I've watched that happen. I've been to the ALA, which is the American Library Association conferences, and I've been to a bunch of those. And editors are the major, all the top editors go to those. And I've been with authors walking around, bump into an editor, and they get into a conversation. "Well, what are you working on?" And then the author that I was with, who at the time happened to be Rick Walton, said, "I got a story." He just went into pitch mode. It's like, "I got a story about, an elephant and a giraffe and blah, blah, blah. And then I've got this." And they're like, "What else you got?" And just going through the list of his new stories that he had memorized an elevator pitch on each one. Perfect. "Oh, really? That sounds great. Send them to me." And even though he got invited to send some, he may or may not have gotten one of them published. I mean, you got to have a lot of ideas. And that's a concept for both authors and illustrators that are in the beginning stages of their career, that they're working on a illustration or a story today, and they treat it as if it's this golden little pet project that you've got to get to the point where you realize that your art is disposable and is not that special each individually. As a collective, your art is special, but not each individual idea is not always going to bear fruit. So you've got to have a lot of ideas.
I have a philosophy or a doctrine that I'm formulating. I've been thinking about lately as for creating things. And that is the rule of threes, essentially. And that is, anytime I come up with an idea, I get it in my head that I need to do 3 versions of it or 3 iterations of it. And so if it's like, I have an idea for a children's book and it's going to be with these 2 characters, I don't come up with just the one story. I'll come up with, well, let's put them in this first story. Let's see what they would do in a second story and a third story. Or if it's macro and it's micro. If I'm doing just a character design, I will do 3 versions of it instead of just the one version of it, So that way you kind of cover bases, you explore areas that your brain wouldn't normally go towards. So yeah, that's just something I've been thinking about,
That's good.
All right. Miranda slips in a second question, and she says, "Do you think it's worth the time and money to be an author illustrator?"
Oh yeah.
Time and money. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Worth it?
I think it's the only thing. I think it's really the only way to make it. I think as an illustrator now. I mean, and why not double your profit if you can? You get to control how the story works. You get to control how the illustrations and the text interact, and you also automatically have something more interesting to give to somebody. If there's text and nice pictures with it, what editor or art director wouldn't be interested in that? I think it's an easy sell. In other words.
And for those who are listening who aren't familiar with the way that the publishing world works, the author and the illustrator get paid about the same, usually roughly the same percentage. In children's picture books, the average is about 5% each. So what Lee's talking about there is that you would get 10% if you royalty
Plus the bigger advance.
Yeah. So and the other reason for that when you talk about it being more lucrative, or is it worth it to be author and illustrator, is that we're living in a publishing world today where publishers really love the idea of marketing one person instead of two, and it cuts their workload down. They're only dealing with one person. There's half the paperwork. There's also, for the art itself, when you're writing and illustrating your own manuscript, you can more efficiently write and illustrate. You can leave out a lot in the text because you're going to pick it up in the pictures and marry the pictures and the words together. In my opinion, often better, not always, but often better than an author. Now, the best authors write confidently because they know that they trust the illustrator, and they know that the illustrator is going to pick up not the slack, but it's almost like it's like a comedy team, right? A perfectly well-oiled comedy team, they rely on each other, like Penn and Teller, right? They work together, they know each other's roles, and they are like one mind almost. And so
I would think it's more like ice skaters, like a ice skating couple.
Probably more like,
I think it's more like peanut butter and jelly.
Probably more like riding a tandem bike is probably more what it's like.
Or riding a horse.
Now I'm going to say something.
Horse and a rider.
Or being
I'm going to say something controversial here. I will add the asterisk that what Will said is right. When there's a good writer and the story is good, it really is a 50-50 collaboration.
Yeah.
Now, I guess I'll ask this as a question instead of a statement so I don't get in trouble. Do you guys think in a lot of children's stories that it's equal lifting among the illustrator and the writer? I feel like the illustrator does heavy lifting. Yeah, I feel like a lot of times the writer sort of hints at something that might be cool, and then the illustrator has to figure out what that cool thing is or how these relationships are working.
Yeah.
I feel like on a lot of stories I've done, I've had to clear up confusing parts of the story, and I don't want to take away from the writers that I've worked for because I love my writers, but I'm doing more work.
It's definitely we live in a writer's world. It seems like in reviews and everything, it's like, you've said this before. It's like you read a review and it's like the story, this is, the characters that, and they'll just gush about the story, and the illustrations are done by this person.
Yeah, we're just an afterthought.
It's an interesting thing because and I got into an argument early on in my career with a friend who's a writer, and I respect her immensely, and my opinion at that time was that my contribution was more important than the author, and she strongly disagreed. And obviously as an illustrator, you're going to overestimate your ability. As an author, you're going to overestimate your worth, right? And she kept going back to this thing: your illustrations can't exist if I don't start it, if I don't originate it, and the whole and over time, I have come around to that level of thinking that if you think about anyone in any artist who has become rich, financially really successful, especially in the music industry, it's the writer, it's the lyrics. It's like you can replace a bass player, a drummer. I mean, like, in fact, a lot of bands is a 1 or 2 person band, and then they just hire out their bassist and their drums to anybody. If they tour, they'll pick up a bassist in another city. That person is replaceable. But the writing of that song, the origination of that song, was where the gold is. And so for that reason, I tend to lean on the fact that, I hate to admit it, but I think that the author's more important than the illustrator.
Oh, we've got a good battle going on. But
Okay, so let me.
I agree. But if it's a good story and has like good illustratable moments and all that stuff. But I would say this: if you have a well-written but poorly illustrated picture book on one side, and then a poorly written but well-illustrated book on the other, the well-illustrated one would win every time in terms of a purchase or in terms of what people like. You can have marginal writing and great illustration and have a great book, but not vice versa.
I don't know. There's a lot of books, and I want to list them, but I don't, because it would disparage either the author or the illustrator. But there's an illustrator who's like really famous in animation, and his first name's Peter. He did a book that was, this is like 10 years ago, I believe. And he was on lists for winning the Caldecott, and he didn't get anything. And then I had authors say, well, the story was poorly written. I mean, it was like not a great story, And I've seen a lot like that where they're just, so I've bought, my shelf behind me is filled with greatly illustrated books with poor stories.
Me too.
Because that's what I buy. Okay. Yeah. But the books that win Caldecotts almost always have a lot of times it's political.
The books that win Caldecott are author illustrator. I would say it's transition to that. That has the most. Go back to our original question. That has the most worth, and it's easier for a good illustrator to just do the best they can on the writing and get something made versus a writer trying to learn how to be an illustrator.
So I was joking earlier, but I think my analogy works. It's like a horse and a rider. Like a horse could say to the rider, my contribution to this race is way more than what you're doing. And the rider could be like, you have all this power. You have no idea where to go in this race.
And when to break and when to draft
and the real answer here, the winner in all this are the centaurs. So the ones that are.
That's very true. It's exactly where I thought you were going with that story, that analogy.
So our advice is be a centaur.
All right, next question.
Now wait, we should break down Little Bot and Sparrow. Was that a great story?
Brilliant story. Illustrations that meet the words really.
Well, now we have talked about us three. I don't know if it would be part of this podcast or a separate thing, but breaking down picture books by the illustrations and by how it matches the story, the illustration contribution to the story, how the two mesh together, and just doing that because there's not too much information out there really from an illustration point of view. Like Jake was saying earlier, you read the reviews, Kirkus Reviews, Publishers Weekly. It really is author centric, and the illustrator just is like, yeah, there was pictures and they were drawn by this person. There's not too much of it.
Right.
So I don't know, but it'd be fun to start to break stuff down in a real way. I don't know if Jake wants to do that right now with Little Bot and Sparrow, but man, I think that would be a fun way to spend some time.
We should do that for a live session, jump session or something.
But
let's do it. We do these jump sessions. Let's do it for a jump session.
Okay, I'll break down Little Bot and Sparrow.
Now that was Jake's book, author, illustrator. And I'm just going to put this out there now. I liked your original version first, and I've told you that before.
The comic version.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now the question is, can we honestly, since we are part of this industry, can we honestly say what we think about oh, this writing is bad, or I don't like this writing, but the illustration is great, or vice versa. That's some pretty controversial. We gotta be okay
Let's have a
with
meeting. Let's have a meeting on the podcast. You guys that are listening right now, just hold. We're gonna have a business meeting about it.
Quick meeting about what we should do.
If you guys can chime in, give a review of our podcast, and then tell us whether you would want to hear a breakdown of stories like that. I'd like to hear how many people are interested.
Well,
in
yeah,
that.
I mean, we could do it on the podcast too. Just if you want to see the images, go to the YouTube. But if you're fine listening to it, we can do a good job.
Yeah, let's do it. That'd be fun.
Yeah, it'd be cool. All right, last question. This comes from Dan and Jason, and their title is "Reaching Out and Touching Readers Metaphorically." First off, they just want to thank us for the podcast. It says they say it has been a real resource for us. And if you don't know who Dan and Jason are, they are a professional author illustrator team. They have a new book out from First Second Books called Blueberry and Pancakes. And their question is how does one launch a book in post-COVID times? The promotional team with the publisher is great, but we recently listened to your podcast about book launches, and it had a lot of creative DIY ideas about promoting and book launches. We're wondering if you yourself have any ideas or have heard any interesting techniques for book launches in this newly socially distant world. Thanks again, Dan and Jason. So, yeah, what do you guys think? Lee and I have both launched books during COVID. I had a book come out last October, I think it was, Awesome Man 2. And you had This Pretty Planet come out around the same time. I'll be honest, this whole thing caught me a little off guard. And other than just posting about it on social media, I didn't do much to really launch it. That doesn't mean I don't have some good ideas, but I'm curious what you guys think.
Same.
Well, one thing you can do is
anything.
I launched, did the promotion for Bonaparte Falls Apart, the Bonaparte Plays Ball, the sequel. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we did, and this was through largely due to Marjorie Kyler, the author, was she reached out to Julie Gribble on Kidlit TV and got us a nice. We got to be the show that for that episode, and we had to rehearse, and we had to wear funky glasses and stuff, and play to the kids, and they have.
I remember that I showed up for part of that. It was really cool.
Oh yeah, so and they have a huge audience. So there are. That's one that I know of that you can reach out to. I'm sure that it's not easy to get on there, but that would be one option. Without being able to physically meet with people, you're going to have to look for online opportunities, maybe collaborations with other YouTubers, collaborations with people that have channels where they're promoting to parents with kids.
Here's what I would do, and it piggybacks on what Will is saying. What I would do is like do an Instagram tour or a YouTube tour, book tour, or a Facebook tour. And what it is you reach out to 10, 15 different people in the Kidlit space who have a platform on any of these channels. And you say, hey, let's do a live stream together. And have it not, it's the same thing they do for talk shows, right? For late night talk shows. Robert Downey Jr. is our guest tonight. Oh, sweet, Robert Downey Jr. And they joke and they do maybe a skit or something together. And at the very end, he's like, oh, by the way, he's got a new movie coming out. Go see Dr. Dolittle in theaters this weekend, right? And so essentially that whole system is set up for these guys to have a free way to get their product out there in front of a bunch of eyes, and for the show to have essentially a free guest. All they have to do is promote promote their book. And it's the same thing on this more micro scale where, maybe someone has 10,000 followers on an Instagram account, but these 10,000 followers are the demographic that would be buying your product. And you guys could do an Instagram live together. You could do a takeover of their account. You could, you could do any sort of collaborative thing where maybe they do something on your account, you do something on their account. So I would go about doing that, and eventually, if you do it, if you're able to do the hustle and the grind and get it 10, 15, 20 of these accounts to do it, the kind of reach that you can have is massive. So I would do that, and that's outside of doing all the other stuff you're supposed to be doing, like building an email list, building your own social media platform and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I have a whole different take on this question, and I don't know if I want to go.
I see you're doing your little pursed lips thing where you're like,
I don't know. Okay, I'm going to be honest with you here. There's a couple different ways to go about promotion from a book. Let's forget COVID times now. I'm just talking just normally when you do a book. I don't get it. I don't understand that. Well, there's the model that you come out with a book, and for those of you guys who maybe don't know this will be good information, that a lot of illustrators and authors make a good chunk of their yearly living from after they do the book. They schedule these school visits, and they'll lump them all together, and they get, it's $1,000 a day, $1,500 a day ish, up to probably $2,500 maybe, depending on if they're well known or not. And then they book a bunch of schools all in a row, so they got a week, they got 3 or 4 visits, and it's a good chunk of change. I feel bad for them during COVID because I don't know how that played out. If you don't do that, which I have not been an active person doing that, I don't really know I don't understand the book promotion part of it, because how it plays out in my world is I've spent the last year of my life on this book. I've been paid a okay amount for doing that work, but once the book and then by the time I deliver the artwork, it's 6 months later when the book comes out or whatever. And so I have moved on with my life because there's no income coming in. So for me to all of a sudden stop once the books arrive at my house and then plan bookstore visits. And again, we're not talking about COVID time yet, so it has been adjusted a little bit, but I don't understand it even under normal times. I just basically say, okay, here's some books that I have. I'm going to sign them and give them to my family. And then I'm already on to the next project because that's the paying gig. Otherwise, I'm paying to go to another city, like, do bookstore visits. Well, okay, I'm going to drive my car, or am I going to fly there? I got to pay for that. It's one thing if the publisher's doing that, and they do that for certain books and certain illustrators, I guess. But I'm just talking the normal illustrator, like me. I have not had a publisher pay for a book tour. So when it comes, people are like, "Oh, how are you promoting your book?" I'm like, I'm not. I hope the publisher is, because I'm not doing anything. I'm on to the next project. And I truly don't understand it. If you're not doing, and if you are doing the school visits, how are you doing new work for the next book? And so the whole part of that is really confusing to me. And I've done almost 30 books and I still don't understand it. So
I think that you hit the nail on the head, though. There are different ways to be successful as an illustrator in the children's book industry. And so for me, I have created other sources of income with my illustration, but beyond illustrating children's book after children's book after children's book. Yeah. Because I really don't want. I did the children's book. I did the going to school visits a lot 10, 15 years ago, and as much as I like the presenting part for the kids, it is a day that just drains me, and I come away just, I don't know.
It's a high energy situation.
It's a high energy situation. It's nerve wracking. I think I told the story on this podcast once of I didn't when we first had push notifications. I got a push notification on the screen in the presentation in the auditorium from an inappropriate friend that just froze me in my
Oh
tracks.
no.
You know, because I didn't
I
have.
don't remember that. That's funny.
Oh yeah, it was so embarrassing. And the teachers, you know, they had their jaws dropped, you know, and
How do I not know this story? I did not know that story.
Yeah, my inappropriate. Everyone has that
Lesson there
inappropriate
is
friend.
to put your phone on airplane mode.
Yeah.
For
Well,
sure.
I learned that one after that. But I did a week in Texas one time of two different schools a day for 5 days, so 10 different schools, and the money was great. But I came home going, I don't ever want to do that again. It's just not me. But I have a friend, David Bedricki, and he's an author illustrator, and that's what he does. And he's a darling to his publishers because he sells books. He goes to the schools. He's in the schools all year long. I don't know what he's done over COVID. I'm sure he's done a lot of virtual school visits, but most of his income was made through the school visits more than through the books. But it's like a symbiotic relationship with the school visits, because if he's not making books, he can't do school visits, and if he's not doing school visits, he's not selling the books. So that's a way, and I guarantee you the publishers love him. They also love Jerry Pallotta, who is not an illustrator. He's an author. He's I illustrated one of his books, and that's what he does. His whole year is every week he's flying to a different state or a different country, and he's doing these school visits. And I have this theory, and this is not about their books. Speaking of David's and Jerry's, but my theory is the quality of their writing could go down, and they're still going to sell their manuscripts, because guess what? They're selling books, right? And it's a numbers. I mean, at the end of the day, you have to be able to sell books to be viable to a publisher, right? So that's that to me. If all I ever wanted to do was illustrate children's books and that's it, I would go the school visit route. I would, and you would do fewer books because a lot of your time is in the schools, and I would just do a book a year, and then be selling that, and then you get to sell your backlist. So what David does, and what a lot of these authors do, is they send an order form to the school a month in advance, 2 months in advance, for the kids to order their books, so that when the author gets there, they give out the books to the kids that ordered one, and then the illustrator signs them all. That's a very viable way to do it. But I'm with you, Lee. As far as like a book launch, let's face it, going to your local Barnes and Noble is a waste of time unless you are a name already. I mean, nobody cares about their getting their book signed by the author illustrator unless the author illustrator is a big name.
Right.
People will buy a book from some author illustrator. They don't even know who they are. If there's a huge line and everyone's like, "Can you believe so-and-so's here today?" Well, I guess I better buy their book and get it signed, Yeah,
the financial incentive at a bookstore signing is so low for the illustrator, because you got to think, I'm making my royalty rate off how much they sell, and say there's 200 people there and they sell 200 books. So I didn't make anything off of that. You know what I mean? And so,
how much do you guys get a book? 75 cents.
Yeah, 60 cents to $1.
Okay, so
let's say $1.
Let's say high, you get $1. Well, I've done Barnes and Noble signings probably 5 times before I realized it wasn't worth it. And I think the best one, I sold 10 books, so I made 10, and I wasn't getting $1 book.
Right. And so I've never understood it, and that's why I'm just like, nope. They're just saying, I get an email from the publisher, hey, let's coordinate some stuff, and I'm sort of thinking in the back of my head, okay, show me what our budget is that you're going to pay me to go to these things. Right. Otherwise, I'm on to the next project, because that's where the money is, and my interest is as well.
And really, I have to clarify, because you know that people are listening to this and they're going, that's not true. I know somebody that did really well. I know I have a friend, Brandon Dorman, or not Brandon Dorman, what's his name?
Mull?
Brandon Mull. Yeah, thank you.
Brandon Mull.
who ironically his books were illustrated by Brandon Dorman.
Right.
But Brandon Mull's an author, and really quick in a nutshell, he came up with, he and his publisher came up with a great marketing plan using Barnes and Nobles. They gave away free school visits. So they said, you don't owe us anything. We're just going to come in for half an hour. We're going to do a rah-rah session with your kids in the auditorium and promote reading. Like, you want your kids to read. Well, you got these fun fantasy books. And so he would go in there and pump them up and go, you guys like to read here? And he would talk about the story. And I don't know all the things he would do, but he would get the kids. He was really good in front of the kids. And he'd say, okay, on Saturday, I'm going to be over at this Barnes and Noble. You know, and he's in a different state, but he's like, at this one particular one here. And meet me there, and I'll sign your book, and tell your parents to bring you there. And he would do 4 or 5 schools in a day. So for a week, he would do, let's say, 20 schools. He had lines around the Barnes and Noble, and the first times that he was doing that, they wouldn't order enough books. He was like, "Well, we're going to need 200 or 300 books, 400 books," and they had like 10. They're like, "Yeah, no one ever sells any books, so we're not ordering all those." And so he brought his own. They brought cases in the car and worked out a way to get them cataloged into the system of Barnes and Noble. And then they had the CRMs from those stores call ahead to the next ones. And he ended up doing that over and over and over, and ended up the series that he was selling was Fablehaven. And that's how he put Fablehaven on the map. That book could have been a no success book, just like so many, but instead it's still being sold in Barnes and Noble today, 10, 15 years later.
Yeah.
Because he rock starred that thing with an innovative plan. So if we're stuck and we're saying we don't know how, I mean, like Lee's over there giving you bad news reports, like there's no way to market it. Well, and to I'm with you, Lee, but you can also write your own manual. You can come up with your own idea on how to promote stuff. It's not all been thought of.
True. And very true. That's great.
Side note, I was at an ALA in LA, the big convention with 25,000
Library Association. Yeah,
25,000 librarians. And the publisher of that Fablehaven was there. I was there with Brandon, and we just happened to go together, and his publisher was there, and the head editor for Simon Schuster was there. They were selling that series to Simon and Schuster, or partnering with them to distribute it, because the small publisher, Shadow Mountain, that originally published it, couldn't handle the demand. And they needed a bigger publisher to send it to. And I was there when they told that story on how they came up with the idea to market it to this senior editor. And he's just shaking his head like, I can't believe. He was amazed. And he's in the top of the industry, one of the top 5 publishers. And he's just shaking his head like, wow, good way to go, guys. I mean, that's so creative of an idea. So come up with your own idea on how to market it.
Yeah.
And let us know when you do.
Yep. Follow up, please, with us.
Did we answer the question? I don't know. I mean, we went all over the map.
We were all over the map. I think I did a great answer. I don't know about you guys, but all right, let's call it good for today. What do you guys think of that? We done?
Yeah, let's wrap it up.
Sounds good.
We're done. Thanks for joining us, everybody. 3-Point Perspective is made possible by SVSLearn.com, where becoming a great illustrator starts. And your hosts today have been Will Terry, Lee White, and myself, Jake Parker. Will Terry, his work can be found at willterry.com and on Instagram at willterryart. Lee White can be found at leewhiteillustration.com and on Instagram, leewhiteillo. And my work can be found at mrjakeparker.com and on Instagram at Jake Parker. Podcast produced by Daniel Tu. That's Daniel TU. You can find his work at daniel2.co. And special thanks to our production manager at SVS, David Bro, for all of his work and making sure things are running smoothly over here. And a thank you to our social media specialist, Lisa Fott, for all that she does to get this podcast out to you guys on social media. If you like this podcast episode, just give us a review. That's all we ask in return. Maybe tell somebody about it. That'd be great too. Send them a link to this episode. And if you actually have a better answer than one of us, I know it's possible. It's possible.
It's highly possible.
Right. You could go to the SVSLearn.com forum, which is free to join and make an account there. And we have a thread devoted specifically to this episode. So go there and let us know what you think. All right. I think that's it. And we'll see you guys next time.